All right, so my name is Mark O'Neill. I do a lot of work with Lowrance, and I do a lot of work with Navionics these days. My home body water is Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, although I do fish in a lot of other areas. I like to go to Canada, which is a lot of what this presentation is going to be about, is uncharted waters and how we can take advantage of it. I'm a licensed Wisconsin fishing guide. As part of that, I do on the water training, I do fishing, and combine the two to try and help people understand their electronics, their maps, their whole setup to actually try and take advantage of everything that they spent their money on. This all started
I'm sitting here texting him going, all right, do this, do this.
I can hear people talking, so.
Why is that?
So I'm going to just take my earpiece out because I guess it really doesn't matter. Well, I'll leave it in. I started in this program basically as it was Cabela's that first approached me about doing classes and doing educational programs at their stores to have a database for their staff, their installers, and their customers as well. So everything has kind of grown from there. And this is my setup. This is, I'm a tiller guy. I've always been a tiller guy. I like the control of the boat. And I like the fact that I can literally place my bait right over where my transducer is. And as a result, my, you know, if you look on the screen right there is my Point One antenna, which is where I'm getting my GPS. So that is actually, you know, within a couple feet of my transducer. So that setup works really well. I can use this boat for demonstrating units very well because it's wide open spaced and I can fit a number of units on it, which also helps. If we go back and how all this started, we all started with paper maps. So back then, people weren't using GPS. We would line up point A, point B, and then we would, in the end, either use some kind of sonar device, or if you go back prior to that, people would use weights and things like that with foot increments and things like that on the actual rope to verify depths and things like that. Then we had sonar introduced in the late 50s, at least commercially. Sonar is basically our eyes of the water column. This happens to be a flasher. Flasher, or the new current graphs, basically are the same function. It's just you're displaying how you're looking at the units differently. You know, so what we're doing now is we are actually merging these two technologies together, where we have GPS position combined with sonar, where we can actually fish an area, come back the next day, fish the area again. The advantage now with companies like Navionics is they're just loading more and more data on these map cards that even make our searching capabilities of trying to locate fish, whether it's structure, whether it's drop-offs, things like that, that we can actually get a much bigger picture and a view of it. So a couple things that are important with what we're going to talk about tonight is the fact that the better your system is set up, the combination of GPS and sonar, the better results you're going to get. If you have a transducer that's pointing off to the side of the boat, you're not really going to get a good representation of what is actually below the boat. So sonar is basically sound waves that are projected through a transducer. They hit the bottom or hit something in the water column. That signal is sent back. It is transmitted back into electrical energy, or a format that the unit can read, and then it is displayed on a unit. Now, the thing to remember about sonar, and the reason I bring this up is it has a direct bearing on the results we get when we do mapping, or whether, you know, it's Navionics doing mapping. Think of it as a spray can. So if I take a spray can and I spray it on a piece of paper, I've got a primary range and I've got spray over, we'll say. So sonar is the same way. We have a primary range and you have the weaker areas on the edges. They're still getting data, but your best data is coming from that center area that is directly underneath the boat. So what happens is it projects it on a screen, sonar screen. Basically what you're seeing here, this is on Lake Geneva, a lake I fish all the time. These are smallmouth bass. We've got suspended fish. The key to remember here too is this is actually on the right side is what's actually underneath the boat. This is your history. So that's what you've gone over before. So this is fine and dandy, but when you have your transducer, which is what part of the 50% of what we're using on the SonarChart Live program, is the better that we install this transducer, meaning when you're in the boat, it needs to be level with the bottom surface, not necessarily level when it's sitting on your trailer. So the more we dial that in to get a good, solid contact with the bottom, the better results we're going to get. An easy way to do that is when you see arches, if you see them leaning one direction or the other, it typically means that your transducer is not level with the bottom. What you want to see is what we have on the bottom here, a nice symmetrical arch. And typically if it's leaning up towards one side, you're going to want to release the ratchet and go the other way to actually get it level. So a nice level transducer will give us a better signal to make better maps. Same with GPS. So GPS is basically, there are satellites flying around the world, and then we have a receiver on our boat that places our position on the map. So it's basically the map is an overlay. It's a layer. Think of it as a layer of what you're doing, and the actual location is another one. So when we do create another map, which is, you know, ideally what we want to do, we are putting an overlay on the existing chart showing our position. So I use a Lowrance Point One antenna. Two reasons. One is it's going to give me basically 10 hits of data a second, which is going to give me better GPS data. Plus, I like the fact that it has a heading sensor. The other reason I use it is I can put that transducer, the actual antenna, as close to my transducer as I can. Another thing to remember when you're setting up your GPS, most of these units have WAS on them, and if you can turn that on, you're going to increase your EPA, which is your estimated position error. It's going to drop significantly. Again, we're trying to limit factors to make what we're seeing as far as our position as accurate as possible. So in the end, we end up with a chart. This is the base map on a Lowrance unit. What you're looking at is the trail. The arrow indicates my position, and these are waypoints that were marked that are obviously the goals of where we're trying to fish. Or, it can be an area to fish, it can be a hazard, it can be a place to eat lunch, get gas, anything like that, your boat launch. So now we've added SonarChart Live, which is for me, a major breakthrough. I got into this educating people or dealing with electronics kind of out of frustration of some maps that weren't accurate. And for the first time now, I can live on the water actually create a map that's very accurate, and that I can, I'm going to keep it to myself. If I use the app, it gets shared to Navionics, which in the end makes their maps better. So it's a win-win for everybody in this situation. So SonarChart Live combines your GPS and your sonar data and actually you're doing it while you're moving, while you're searching for fish. You can do it while you're fishing. So it's continually getting more data, excuse me, which is a big factor in my mind. So it's available with all new current Navionics cards that have an active subscription. And it will work on the following units: HDS Carbon, Gen 3, the TIs, and also through your Navionics app, which can also be synced to these units, which also works very well. So the area that I did a lot of the groundwork on for this webinar was Lake of the Woods. Lake of the Woods is just a huge body of water that any map company, it is a challenge to get to cover this entire thing. And even the whole country of Canada, for that matter, is just an overwhelming amount of water. Lake of the Woods, you're looking at basically 1,679 square miles. There's almost 25,000 miles of shoreline. So what happens is to get data it's just an overwhelming project. So, and not just Lake of the Woods, but also pretty much anywhere in Canada is a challenge. So what you end up with is maps like this that basically they're showing you the highlights of the structure. They're showing you some drop-offs. There's little numbers on them here where they'll put a reference of, you know, that's a 15-foot reef. You know, that's a 13-foot. So as a result, in certain particular sections of Lake of the Woods or a new body of water, it's limited areas. I mean, there's areas that I've never even fished because of just a general fear of hazards, things like that. Things float, things move. So with the introduction of SonarCharts Live, it has totally opened up different areas, particularly on this body of water, where I can fish that I never fished before. And it's because I can actually get more data, I can learn more about the structure, and actually make a decision on any given area, is this somewhere where I want to fish. So this is an example I'm going to use. This is, you know, a 29-foot reef. I marked it just because so I knew that's where I was going to start. And you can see here, there's other reefs that it's marked 13 foot. You know, it's giving you a warning here that it's 1 foot. So what we're going to do is, what I do this, because I'm not only looking for structure, I'm also, I mean, my bottom line is I'm looking for fish. So what I do is I'm going to use a split screen of chart and sonar. So as I go through this area and I'm getting my chart data, I'm actually looking for fish at the same time. And I can see a great piece of structure that looks like it's ideal, but if I don't see a reason to fish on my sonar screen, I'm not going to do it. There's no reason to do it. So to activate SonarCharts Live, number one, you have to be, your chart option has to be set on Navionics, because that's the map card that it works with. Under your overlays, you're going to turn on, you're going to choose SonarCharts Live. So when that happens, if you look here, all of a sudden we see a white area. And now it's showing that SonarCharts Live is actually activated. So what it is doing right now, it is recording my sonar data, and it is recording my GPS data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive around, and I'm going to try and find, you know, the high spot of the hump. And I'm going to go around and I'm going to look, you know, I can see fish over here, but, you know, those fish are in 50 feet of water. They're going to be a little harder to target. You know, I can see right there, I had marked the high spot of the reef, and there it is right there. So, I mean, it's really great that you're building a mental picture in your brain of structure. So I'm going to continue to go around. You know, here I'm starting to see fish. I got a little hump right here, which is this 42-foot hump or finger that I had just gone over. and I went back into the deeper water. So I'm starting to see fish. I'm actually starting to build the model. We'll say I'm building a mental model in my brain of, and I'm looking at it at the same time, but I'm also paying attention to where fish are, because that's ultimately my goal. So once I get it done, as you can see, there's quite a bit of structure that is on this hump. And it's at this point, based on what I've seen or didn't see, I can make a decision in my own brain of, do I want to fish this area? Now, what we're looking at here, this is Canada, these are walleyes. My guess is, you know, you've got some walleyes sitting right here on the sonar screen, hugging the bottom. This is an area I've never fished before, but what it does is it sorts out for me, is it an area that I want to fish? So I did fish it, and we caught some fish. So it's a tool that it's a game changer. There's no doubt about it. The fact that I can look for fish, I can look for structure, and get a better understanding of everything that I'm seeing, and make a valued decision. Do I actually want to fish this waters? So there are some options that are important. In other words, features. We'll say these are features of SonarChart where I can adjust some settings to help me get a better understanding. So if I go under the live options, I have what's called transparency. So what transparency adjusts is the balance of what was on the existing map Navionics card compared to what I'm creating. And I can adjust it so that either I don't want to see what was there, or I can do it so where I can actually combine the two views. So if I turn it to the minimum, what it is showing here is all this white area is all the data that I just created. This is on a different location. The area in the background here is what was actually on the original map card. So if I change that, and now I turn my transparent into max, I can actually see both. Typically when I use this, I'm either in the middle or I'm on the max side, because I always like to compare the two, just to see, you know, how much I've improved, or, you know, was the original map a good, you know, representation of what was there. So I typically, this is the way I'm going to use it, is where I can see both structures. Then you have what's called minimum depth, which really is, my guess is primarily designed to give you a warning of lower level, shallower water, we'll say, so that you can identify, say, a hazard, but it's also a great feature to pinpoint depths. So in this case, let's say the walleyes or smallmouth, whatever they are, I'm hitting these fish a lot, and I'm finding them in 21 feet of water. So what happens is if you look, it's actually highlighting. You can't see it real well, but this is pink. It's actually showing me all the water that is in 21 feet or less. So I can move this scale up or down to basically match the depth that I'm trying to find the fish. That's how I use it. Most of the water I'm fishing is deeper. So it's deeper water, so I'm really not looking in hazards. Now, if it was in the springtime where, you know, the walleyes are spawning, things like that, then I may set it, use it more the way it, you know, it appears to be designed to do. Now I've got a note that a couple people raised their hands. I'm not really sure how to I would say our best bet is to leave questions until the end. My guess is, unless somebody can tell me how to answer that. Well, maybe that's a message here. Okay, so what I've also got here is I've got a couple other examples of where, oh, here's one, let's see. Okay, well, we're going to keep going. So I have a couple other examples of before and afters. So again, this is a reef. The one that's interesting about this is, it's saying it's a 14-foot reef, which is, is a great feature, because typically when you fish bodies of water like this, you're fishing, if you find a 14-foot reef and they're hitting on 14-foot reefs, typically you go to other ones in that same depth range, and that's where they're going to be. So after I mapped this area, and I'll go back to, okay, so that's the same reef where I actually did map the contours. So the neat thing, the thing I thought was interesting is this 14-foot reef, reference number they put on here is literally right next to the 14-foot peak that the SonarCharts Live actually found, which I thought was pretty amazing that, that it was that accurate. But here again, I've got a lot of structure, I've got drop-offs, I've got points, and there's actually here, there's another little reef, there's actually two here. So this, this would be a good area for me to fish. But again, while I was mapping it, I would be monitoring where the fish are. And ultimately, that's going to make my decision of whether I'm going to fish or not. Here's another one, 18-foot reef. Press the map after I'm done with it. And you can, here's again, we do have the 18-foot, but there's also a 13-foot reef on here. So there's a lot of data that is available using SonarCharts Live that was never available before. And the nice thing about this is the more you've got your setup dialed in, the better the results you're going to get. And the nice thing about this too is even after I just stop and fish, it is going to continue to improve the data. Once it gets enough to the point where it's not receiving any more new data, it will stop. And you basically have your map and you're fishing. If I turn SonarCharts, the function off, the overlay, the map goes away. So you can literally, well, anyway, get the idea. So doing this, it's helped me catch a lot more fish. There's no doubt about it. Great Lakes, I mean, Lake of the Woods is a great lake. But it's just an overwhelming amount of water, and the fact that I can actually, even before I put a hook in the line, using my Navionics and my Lowrance combined, I can actually decipher and just pick apart an area and decide, do I even want to fish this body of water? Now, that's for an area that basically there's very limited maps. But let's take a lake like Lake Geneva that I fish all the time, where I do have good charts from Navionics. I have found that I can use this to my advantage to even pull more data out of there. And in the end, if I link it via my app, actually give that data to Navionics, so in the end they actually get better maps. But here would be an example. I can see the lines in the background here are the original Navionics map. It does show that there is a drop off here or some structure, that there's a point, but using SonarCharts Live, I'm actually seeing a lot more visibility of points And, you know, this is a waypoint I put in there years ago that I caught smallmouth on. And now I kind of see why I caught smallmouth there. You know, I got a little shelf here. These are smallmouth. That's the predominant species on Lake Geneva. Lake Geneva is it's a, I don't know, 6,000 acre lake in southern Wisconsin. It's a glacier lake. It's the second deepest lake in Wisconsin. It's about 138 feet deep, and it's very clear. So the smallmouth and even the largemouth typically are in deeper water than the larger ones, at least, are going to be in deeper water than you would see, say, in a, you know, in a reservoir in Alabama or something like that. Here's another one that you can actually, where it's actually riding, you know, on top of it. The white area is showing me the area that I'm actually mapping. A key thing with fishing for predators, you know, these big balls here, those are bait fish. And that is why these smallmouth sitting here, that's why they're there. I mean, we're in 30 feet of water, but because of the water clarity, this is basically a finger that sticks out, and it drops off here and probably goes to 80 feet of water by the time, you know, if you were out further. So that would be another example. This is, again, Lake Geneva. These are smallmouth again. And again, dialing in your sonar and your GPS to get good results. I mean, this is my bait dropping down with the right into these smallmouth. So, and again, that's one of the reasons I fish with a tiller, is the fact that I can always see what I'm doing when I'm fishing for these fish. Based on the color of these fish, those are, you know, probably 3-4 pound smallmouth. Sonar goes, these colors actually pertain to signal strength. It goes yellow, red, blue, and white. So when you're seeing thicker arches like this that are yellow, you know, those are decent fish. These are not small fish. You know, this one up here that's suspended, that blue fish right there, you know, that would represent basically something a little bit bigger than a, you know, a panfish, something like that. Not a very big fish. These are some of the nicer fish we caught in the last couple of years on Lake Geneva. The thing to remember about these fish is every one of those fish came in over 25 feet of water, even that largemouth. It's just a different body of water that you really need. Things like your sonar and SonarCharts Live just makes a huge improvement on helping me understand what is on the water there. The other thing there, and I don't know how many people know this, but you don't necessarily have to be on the water to do this. If you have a logged chart that you did, it's logged data, every Lowrance unit can log data. The trick with SonarCharts Live is it needs a GPS to activate. It needs a fixed GPS position. So if you have some log data that you've done in the past, you can literally use your simulator mode, playback mode on these Lowrance units and actually log that data, and it'll retain on that Navionics card. And I guess that's a question that will probably come up, is this data is actually stored. It's on the Navionics card. It creates a folder, and it is not stored on the unit, it is stored on the card. So just something to keep in mind, it's your data unless you share it through the app. And then you can give it to Navionics as an example, and they can actually make better data, which then everybody wins. This is my web page. I'm trying to do more and more of helping people. This is where people sign up for my classes on water training. We do a Lowrance University program at Cabela's where we do a lot of the education stuff, but I also do fishing reports, primarily just on Lake Geneva and Lake of the Woods, showing people, trying to help them catch more fish, bottom line. Facebook page, my fan page is Structure Fishing with Mark O'Neill. This is where typically I'm going to put all electronic stuff. When there's software updates, I've done a lot of SonarCharts live demonstrations and things like that on this Facebook page. We're showing the differences and things like that. That's where some of these files that we're actually looking at earlier came from. I'd like to thank Navionics for hosting this event, and also thank them for coming up with a product that, in my mind, is one of the better products that exists. It's a game changer, and especially for people, let's say you live on a lake, and there is no map. You can literally, what you're going to do is drive around, and it's going to fill in the blanks as you're driving around. One thing I will tell you, and if you get an area that looks funny, just go over it again, because it's going to continually, it's going to compound this data into the best results it can. And in the end, like I said, once it gets enough data where it's not adjusting itself, it will actually stop recording, and you have the data that is available for you to use now, to use next year, whenever you want. So now I got a couple of these nice Lowrance hats here that we're going to do a raffle for. So based on, I'm going to give Navionics a few numbers of just random numbers, and then they're going to coincide with people that signed up for this. And then if you get an email, if you win, you will get an email probably in the next day or two saying that you won a hat, and we'll get your information and we'll actually ship you the hat. Okay, I've got a couple questions. So if there's questions, now is the time to do it. So I'm going to go through these. Steve asked, is there any way to copy of your slides? If you send me an email and I guess explain why you want them, I guess, yeah, I don't have a problem sharing some of these. Ken asks, what is the optimum boat speed to collect data? You can do it pretty fast. My guess is, I do it slower. My guess is you can do it 10, 20 miles an hour, as long as that GPS holds its position and then the sonar remains a fixed lock on the bottom, you'll be able to do it. But I will tell you from experience of doing this, I try and do it at about 5 miles an hour. And I'll just tell you why, because the slower I go, I'm going to get more data. If I take my cone, and I go at 10 miles an hour and I go at 5 miles an hour per second, I'm going to get more data over a given shorter range of period of time. So to me, I typically do it at 5 miles an hour. I don't have to worry about cavitation, anything like that. That's what I found. Can you do it faster? Yes. A lot of times what I'll do is when I pull up to an area, when I'm actually going back and forth, trying to find where the reef is, trying to justify whether I'm going to fish, is I will go over faster just to get an overview of the structure. And if I see fish, then I will go back in and slow down and actually try and get more refined data to actually make my mech better. And then even when I start to fish, I'm going to it's going to stay running, and it's going to fill in a little spots. I have an XI5 trolling motor, and it has this anchor and jog function, and typically I'm never just sitting there. So I'm moving around slowly with that jog feature, And while I'm doing that, I am still increasing the accuracy of the map as I go along. And as I said, once I get to a point where it's not receiving any new data, it simply at that point stops recording. Okay, question is from John. Will I still have access to your SonarChart's live data after your subscription expires? You have access to the data that you recorded, but you're not going to be able to do any more. I can't remember. Instead of saying SonarChart's live, it says SonarChart's, it's like history, something like that. So you do have access to it, what you've already done, but you cannot do it anymore. Okay, how close do Jeff asked, how close do the grid lines have to be for accuracy? It's a fundamental result of the depth of the water you're fishing. So sonar is a cone. So think of it as a snow cone that is turned upside down. So the deeper I go, the bigger that cone is going to get. I think it's a function of, it's something to get comfortable with. And don't forget, you have what I would call the overspray. So let's say you have a 20-degree cone. My guess is you're actually covering more like 30 of pure data, but the primary data is in the 20-degree range. So it's something that you just, based on your depth, you're going to have to kind of trial and error it. It'll fill in data as you do it, and you'll see the actual contour line starting to create. And it's my guess is, you know, if I'm in 25 feet of water, you know, my gaps are probably, you know, 20 feet. Guessing 20, 30 feet, something like that. And then as I fish or as I go over that data again, it is just going to create, you know, fill more and more of the data in. Steve asks, what is my email address? It's on this form right here. The easiest one is mark@structure-fishing.com. That is all linked to my website. Okay, how does water condition affect the quality of your maps? Ken asks. Well, when I'm running my carbon unit, for the most part, with the processors that are in these units, I'm pretty much running everything on automatic. So as I go from a you know, a dirty part of the lake to a cleaner part, it is adjusting my sensitivity, and I'm also running in my depth on auto because I fish a lot of drop-offs, and I really don't want to have to continually change my depth. Now, if I get to a specific area where I'm anchored and sitting, I may zero in more. So my guess is it definitely will have a bearing on it, but the adjusting is being done by the carbon unit. So as it changes the sensitivity, it will, my guess, I mean, everywhere I fish is pretty clean. So I've never seen a direct change, other than if there's a lot of boat traffic, things like that, it may muddy it up. But again, I'm counting on the sensitivity of my carbon unit to help straighten that out. So I'm sure there is a difference, but I'm counting on my carbon unit to actually do the adjusting for me on that. Mark asks, am I using a total scan? Plus, how do you set up the boat transducers? Thanks. Okay. I've done some testing on total scans. Currently on my boat right now, there's not a total scan. On a lot of the on-the-water events that I've done, I've been on a number of boats with the transducer, with the total scan. It's a great transducer. It's basically this, you know, it's an HST transducer inserted into a structure scan transducer. As far as setting up the boat transducers, a couple key things to keep in mind is under your sonar settings, and I'd say 3/4 of the boats I go on, they're not set right. So some key things to keep in mind, again, with fine-tuning your transducer or your sonar, is that if you go under sonar, under your settings, and you go under installation, there's a list down at the bottom. The unit comes, it says unknown. It has no idea what's hooked up to it. Every transducer has a little silver tag on it right by the plug that'll give you your model number. You need to pick that model number. Now, some of the transducers that have the 9-pin configuration have an auto ID feature where it will set it up for you, but it really depends on what you're plugging it into. Some of the total scans will do that itself, but you need to make sure that the system is set up where it has the proper transducer selected. And the other thing is your fishing mode. The unit comes set to general. And from my memory serves me right, general is 5,000 feet. Most people, inland fishermen, are not fishing in 5,000 feet. If you're on the ocean and you are, that's fine. So the main settings you need to worry about are general, shallow water, and freshwater. So shallow water is geared more for less than 100 feet. That's what most inland fishermen are using. Freshwater, I believe, is somewhere around 400. So the advantage to doing that is you're changing the focal point. You're telling the transducer this is the area you need to focus on. Will shallow water work in 150 feet? Yes, it will. But what I've seen happen is on Lake of the Woods, Lake Geneva, Green Lake in Wisconsin, deeper lakes, is when I motor and I go over the deeper water, that's when it gets in trouble. So when I fish Lake Geneva, as an example, I have my unit set on freshwater. Again, the more information I give my unit, the better maps from SonarChart Live I'm going to get, because the better signal I have, the better the map's going to be. Randy. Okay, so Randy fishes lakes where the levels fluctuate. How does it adjust? Well, what it's going to do is when you turn on SonarCharts Live and you start fishing again, it's going to average those new depths into, they're going to override the values that you had before, bottom line. So instead of just fishing and not having to do anything, you're basically going to have to go over the area again, and it will adjust itself to the new water levels. And then literally it takes a minute or two. I mean, obviously if it's a huge reef, it's going to take longer than if it's a reef that's only 30 feet in diameter. Again, that's where the speed comes in hand. Like I said, typically when I get to an area, I'm going to go over it quicker, do a rough mapping, and then if I see a reason, I'm going to come back and I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to try and refine the thing. Basically, that's the same thing you're going to do as the water level changes. Johnny asked, did I overbuy? I bought a carbon with structure scan 3D. My opinion, no. I have a carbon. Carbon, to my knowledge, in my opinion right now, is the best unit I've seen on the market. The screen quality is unreal. 3D is somewhat, in my opinion, a misunderstood feature. It does show the structure in a three-dimensional view, which is great. But more importantly to me, it's the first device I've seen that'll actually show me the entire water column and everything that's in it. And not only that, but is it on the left side of my boat? Is it on the right side of my boat? If you fish with sonar and structure 3D combined or on two units, say, what's going to happen is you're going to, I may go over an area, I'll go over a reef and it'll show me exactly where the school of fish is. And I know that's where I'm going to start fishing. I'm not going to start fishing on the other side, but more importantly, it's also going to show me, is it on left side of the boat? Is it on the right side of the boat? So it's a great search vehicle, and especially guys that troll, it's going to show you exactly how far these fish are down, how far out they are to the side. It's a great tool, but I'm not so sure that people are using it to their full potential at this point. Bill asks, when you return to a reef that you use SonarCharts live on, is that data on the map, or will you have to bring it back up? When you turn SonarCharts live back on, the data will be there. And again, it will adjust. You know, I know Bill is from Lake of the Woods. In his case, you know, let's say the water fluctuated 6 inches from the last time he was there. So what it's going to do is, as he goes over it again, it's going to take that data and it's going to redo it basically, and it'll retain that last setting you had. Guys that fish rivers and you're on a wing dam or some structure, you know, that can vary month to month. So again, excuse me, it's going to adjust itself, but no, it will retain it. The data will be there. My guess, in your case, Bill, it's not really going to change much at all. So you would just start fishing. The SonarCharts Live also use data from side scan transducers as well. To my knowledge, no. I think it's just using sonar data at this point. I hope I'm right there, Tim, but from my understanding, everything is being pulled off of the sonar, off your structure. Okay, Steve says, thank you. Okay, Ken says, I'm at choppy versus smoother water. The ideal situation is to map. You're going to get better data when the water is smoother, because the distance from the transducer to the bottom is not going to change. My guess is the averaging, your data may fluctuate a little bit in rough water. Again, if I went back and it was smooth, my guess is that would average itself out. Again, if you have the transducer mounted on the transom, as an example, that transom is going to move a lot less than if it's on the front of the boat. And I can attest to that, having a tiller. You know, the poor people in the front of my boat are going to get exposed to much rougher waves or movement of the boat than I am. So my answer to that, Ken, would be, ideally, it doesn't have to be glass smooth. If you have 3-footers, it'll pick it up, but the data is not going to be as good as if I did the logging and there was 6-inch waves. Okay, Andre, best ping speed when still fishing. I run my ping speed at max. I've never seen a reason to change it. I know some people may change it when they're trying to, say an example would be, they're trying to get around some crosstalk issues. I change frequencies, and plus I have an Airmar TM150 is one of the transducers on my boat that I can actually change the frequency. So I'm finding I have yet to really find a reason to decrease my ping speed. So Jeff has a hotspots in Navionics North region. Do I have to renew subscription to do the mapping? Yes, but my guess is there's a cutoff date, and I don't know that. If I had a hotspots map that was 10 years old, the map, what's on that card is not going to work. One of the biggest things that is driving these devices now, meaning a Lowrance unit, you know, a Lowrance Carbon has double the processor that a Gen 3 has. If you look at a map card from 10 years ago, it may have been on a, you know, half a gig, 1 gig card. You know, a northern region card right now may come on a 16 gig card. There's just, Navionics has so much more data on their card than they did even, you know, even 2-3 years ago. So your option is if it's too old of a Navionics North Region card, is you go buy a Navionics update card, which is more, and what they're going to do is they're going to give you a credit of, I think it's about $50 if you had an older card, not just a Navionics card, anybody's card. So you buy the card, you put it in, it's going to say, okay, we picked up the new card. I want to, you need to put in your old one, that activates the new one, and basically you have a brand new card that, you know, you can put all the data on, and your old card is still good. So I hope that answers your question. The Jim asked, does the card stay on the card? Does the data stay on the card indefinitely and come back every time I turn on SonarCharts Live? Yes. Joel asked, my card is filled up on a second day of charting. How do I get more space? I would call customer support on that, because there is a way, I'm pretty sure, where you can pull that data off and back it up, but I haven't done it yet, and I don't want to lead you into a situation where that happens. Now, I find it hard to believe that you would fill that. The testing I've done, you could go like a week without filling these cards. Do you have anything else, Joel, on that card? Because you shouldn't be writing to that card. If you're doing backups or logging, you do not want to write to a Navionics card. So either email me, I would call customer support, because that does not make any sense to me at all, because what I've seen, the data is actually takes up very little space on these cards, and the initial testing I did, you could go, I mean, days. Okay, how do you get it to show true shoreline? Shoreline in relation to where you're at on the card is a direct derivative of your GPS accuracy. So with these newer units, you should be able to dial these, you know, your accuracy in well under 10 feet. I brought up this WAS technology that's available for GPS. That will more than probably double your accuracy by putting that on. So the first thing I would ask Joel is go onto your device, under your satellites, under your configuring your GPS source, and see if WAS is turned on. Occasionally there is an error. If you let Navionics know that, my guess is it will be fixed, because I've done that in the past. So I would first, Joel, what I would do is let's make sure your GPS is actually getting a good signal and actually being as accurate as it should. And because if it's not, that could have a direct bearing on your relationship of where you're in the water versus where you're at, what you're actually seeing on shore. If I have, Jim asked if I have SonarCharts Live, my console, will the data show up on my unit in the front of the boat? As long as you have an Ethernet, number one, and as long as you choose that Navionics card from the other unit as a source, and as long as you turn on SonarCharts Live, yes. And I hope I'm not speaking out of line. The newer software that I've been testing, it does work. I know in the beginning it did not. So if it doesn't work right now, it will be soon. Sean asks, how fast can you go to read out fish, structure, etc.? Can I go 20 miles an hour and still get a good readout? Yes, you can, but you have to remember that your time over the fish is less. So when, or structure. So if I look at an arch, you know, to me, if I'm gonna, the best way to see an arch is I'm going, 1 or 2 miles an hour. I can get some, those screenshots that I used earlier in this presentation. They had nice screenshots. My guess is I was probably just going a couple miles an hour. So what happens is the longer I'm over those fish, the wider, the bigger the arch is going to be. If I'm sitting still, with some of those shots that I showed of the smallmouth, they weren't arches. They looked more like spaghetti noodles. That's because the distance from me and the fish is changing very little. As I start to move and the fish actually go into my cone, get closer to the center of this cone and exit, the distance from the fish to the transducer changes. That's what makes the arch. So when I go 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, that gap, that arch narrows up and it gets pointier and pointier, to the point where if I'm going 30 miles an hour, I still should be able to see fish, but they're going to be more of a vertical line. So you're going to be able to see fish at 20 miles an hour, but they're going to look very different, and they're not going to look as an arch. So if you're searching for fish, if you see a vertical blip, that would be my sign to slow down and further review the situation. That's what I would recommend. Hope that answers that. Does using a networked transducer function have any impact on the recorded data? To my knowledge, no. I have seen no difference in, there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 transducers on my back, on my boat, and whether I'm going through a secondary unit, a sonar hub, I've seen no impact on the recording at all. So hopefully that answers that. I thought HDS records sonar at 200 kilohertz. Are you using other frequencies? Greg, 200, when I'm logging data, I'm using 200 kilohertz, correct. When I'm using other frequencies, typically an example would be, I'm in a tiller, I'm going to use 200 kilohertz in the back of my boat. Typically in the front of my boat, if that unit is running and somebody's using it, it's going to be at another frequency. It's going to be at 83. The other difference is 83 is going to give me wider coverage. I'll use 83 as more of a search frequency than I would 200. 200 is going to be, if I'm looking for fish, once I find the fish and I'm going to zero in, I'm going to go to 200, but all my recording is done at 200 kilohertz. And that's probably just more by default than anything. The adjustable frequencies, pretty much for me, are more if I'm searching in deeper water. The Airmar TM150 is probably the best transducer I've seen for, if I'm looking for lake trout over 100 feet of water, I'm going to use either 83 or I'm going to go to my Airmar. So hopefully that answers your question. Sean, is it true you get a better readout, better image if you fit the transducer outside versus inside the boat? Do you recommend mounting transducer on the outside? Okay. No matter what anybody says, if I'm going to shoot my sonar through fiberglass, it's going to get compromised. And it may not be a lot, but it's going to get compromised. So most people I know that have, fiberglass boats, a lot of them have 2 transducers. So they'll have the one transducer that is built in the hull, and they'll have one outside. So the one in the hull is going to be much better at maintaining bottom contact when you're actually on plane going faster. The one that's on the outside on the transom is going to be influenced by cavitation, other things on the water. You're going to have better luck reading longer on the through hull. So to answer your question, it works. It works good. If you have a fiberglass boat and you only have one transducer, you're still going to get a good signal, but you're going to get a better signal with a transducer that's outside. Okay, Andre says you can record 1,000 hours or more, which is what I was under the same impression. So Who asked this? So the individual that asked about having the full card, there's something else going on here with your card, or there's other data on it that you should not have that card full at this time. I have an LSS. Joel asks, I have an LSS2 transducer and HDI. What setting do you see works well with this? Well, number one, you're going to have to be careful. The unit itself can only, if it's on one unit, the unit's only going to allow you one structure scan source. So it's not going to allow you to run side scan and then down scan from the HDI at the same time. It's not going to do it. So it's going to make you choose one or the other. So you have a couple options. When you use the LSS2, keep in mind if you have an HDI transducer and you have down scan, let's say they're on 2 devices. I don't know if you have more than one or not, but let's just say both those sources, unless you shut them off, are going to be running at the same time and can cause, you can get crosstalk from structure scan as well. So you got to be careful with multiple structure scan devices on the unit. The other option is if you have 2 units and say your HDI is on the front of the boat and the LS2 is on the back, you can use a stop function if you want to use downscan in the front. The other way around it is you can lie to the Lowrance unit and tell it that it's not an HDI transducer, which will shut off all downscan functions of that transducer. So it really kind of depends on if you have 1 or 2 units and how you're going to use them. Your HDI transducer, yes, you need to input that. If you're going to use both, just remember to use stop sonar when the other one is using on your structure scan. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of little vertical lines. That's crosstalk from the structure scan. If you don't, if you're going to use the HDI transducer, make sure it says that under your sonar settings, under installation. That way it's going to give you the proper transducer selection and frequencies and things like that. So if you have any more issues with that, send me an email. But that can be tricky when you have 2 structure scan devices on your system. So that appears to be all the questions that I'm seeing. Hopefully I covered everything. If there's another question, email is probably the best way to get in touch with me. My email's on the screen. Customer service at both Lowrance and Navionics are very good these days with problem solving. My guess is, they're going to know things that I don't know, especially on the Navionics side. And I would like to thank everybody for participating in this. And if we will get this drawing done for the couple of Lowrance hats. And I thank you all again and wish you all a good night. And that's it.